My name is Myra Swanson. I'm 69 years old, and 6 weeks ago, my son made me a promise that he had no intention of keeping. I broke my hip. My son Scott said he would move in and take care of me. Week 1, a text message. Week 3, 3 kids on my doorstep while I could barely stand. Week 6, I changed the locks and called my lawyer. There were things they didn't know. Not Scott, not his wife Kendra, not his brother Bryce. They didn't know I'd spent 31 years at Ridgemont Regional Medical Center learning exactly how people behave when they think no one is watching and exactly what to do with that information when they're wrong. What happened when Scott finally showed up at my door is the reason I'm telling you this story. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories. This is where strong women share the moments that changed everything, not with shouting, but with strategy. If you're new here, you're in the right place. Drop a comment below and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. March 14th, 7:20 in the morning. I remember because it was a Monday and I had a doctor's appointment at 9 o'clock. I stepped onto the front porch and the wood was still wet from the night's freeze, that particular shade of dark that looks dry until you're already committed. My right foot went first, then my hip, then a sound I had never heard from my own body. A low, hard pop that didn't echo so much as land like a period at the end of a sentence. I lay on the porch for 40 minutes. The cold worked through my robe in layers. I could see the street from where I fell. The Henderson sedan, the bare maple at the corner, the mailbox Frank had painted red in 2003 because I said blue was too common. Lorraine Briggs, my neighbor of 22 years, finally spotted me through her kitchen window and came running in her slippers. I spent 31 years at Ridgemont Regional Medical Center. I started in the billing department, 38 years old, after Frank and I moved here. I worked through compliance through department management, through 2 hospital mergers until I was VP of operations overseeing a $200 million budget and staff I trusted with my life. I knew the ER by its sounds. I knew the gurney wheels on the linoleum fractured femoral neck hip replacement surgery scheduled within the week. They gave me a walker in the hallway before I was discharged, and I stood there holding at this aluminum frame, the metal cold under my palms. I remember thinking I have walked those hospital halls for 31 years. Now I cannot walk to my own mailbox. Then Scott called. His voice was shaking. He said, "Mom, I'm coming. I'll move in. I'll take care of everything." I am not a woman who cries easily, but lying on that gurney, hearing my son's voice, I let myself believe him. He came the next day. Scott walked into that hospital room with carnations pink and white wrapped in the clear plastic sleeve from a gas station rack. I have grown peas in my backyard for 20 years. He's known that. He stood there holding those carnations with a look of such genuine effort that I didn't say a word about them. He pulled the chair close to my bed. He leaned his elbows on his knees. He said, "I'll move in by Friday. I'll handle the groceries, the meds, the physical therapy appointments." "That's a promise, Mom." "That's a promise, Mom." He said it with the particular confidence of a man who has never had to keep one under audit. Kendra hadn't come. "She's getting the kids settled with her mom for a few days," he said, which seemed reasonable at the time. Bryce FaceTimed from Denver. 4 minutes, some background noise. Bryce's familiar squint at a too bright screen. "Hang in there, Mom. Scott's got this." Then the call ended. I was discharged on Friday. Scott drove me home. He carried 1 suitcase from his car. Small overnight bag. Small of the kind you take for a long weekend. I noticed it. I cataloged it the way I had cataloged 1,000 small discrepancies in 30 years of operations management. A small suitcase doesn't lie. He helped me through the door. He got me settled in the chair. He said, "I got this. Mom, relax." He said, "I got this," the way people say we should get lunch sometime, confident, meaningless. The kind of statement designed to close a conversation rather than open a commitment. But I sat in my chair and I did not say that. I said, "Thank you, Scott." And I watched him put his bag in the guest room down the hall. Day 1, he made scrambled eggs. He wiped the counter. He asked if I needed anything from the pharmacy, and I said yes, 2 prescriptions, and he wrote them on a sticky note. Day 2, he said he had to run home for some things. Day 3, he did not return. Day 4, a text. Hey, Mom. Crazy day? Kendra needs help with the kids. I'll be there tomorrow. Love you. I read it 3 times. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table and sat for a moment with the silence. The walk from my bedroom to my kitchen took 8 minutes on the walker, 8 minutes of shuffling that frame across carpet through the hall, across the linoleum, gripping the handles until my palms ached. I opened my pill bottles myself. Myra Swanson, who had supervised a surgical supply team for 11 years, fumbling with a child-proof cap at her kitchen table at 7 in the morning. I ordered Uber Eats twice. The fridge had half a carton of eggs and a jar of mustard. Ruth Apor arrived that first Wednesday, a home health aide my insurance covered 3 times a week, 2 hours per visit. She was quiet and efficient, the kind of person who notices everything and says very little. She looked around my kitchen. She looked at me. She said, "Is anyone staying with you, Mrs. Swanson?" I said, "My son said he would." She wrote something in her file without a word. That night, I checked the video doorbell footage for the first time. It takes perhaps 4 taps. Day 2, Scott's car pulled up. Scott walked in. Scott walked out. 11 minutes. I watched the timestamp twice to be certain. 11 minutes. My son spent 11 minutes in my house that week. That is less time than a pizza delivery. Ruth came Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Each time, no one else was there. Each time, the refrigerator was nearly empty. Each time she moved through my house with that quiet economy of motion that comes from 15 years of seeing what people leave behind when they stop paying attention. She did more than her job required. She made soup on Wednesdays and left 2 containers in the fridge. She called the pharmacy herself and arranged delivery when my pain medication ran low for the 2nd week in a row. She rescheduled 2 physical therapy appointments that Scott had confirmed he would drive me to and then hadn't. She didn't announce any of this. She simply did it the way capable people do and wrote it all in her file. I found it difficult, not the pain. I understood pain. I had managed pain the way I managed everything else, with structure and stubbornness. What was difficult was this. I spent 31 years at that hospital telling patients, telling staff, telling anyone who would listen that asking for help is not weakness. And here I sat in my own kitchen, too proud to tell my home health aide that my son wasn't coming. I thought about Scott at 8 years old. I had worked 60 hours a week through much of his childhood. I missed the school play in 4th grade. I missed 3 soccer seasons. Frank was there. Frank was always there, patient and steady, telling the boys their mother worked hard so they could have the house, the yard, the college funds. Maybe this was what I had earned. Maybe Scott had simply learned absence from me. Ruth set a bowl of soup on my table. She said, "Mrs. Swanson, you deserve better than this." I said, "I know, but knowing and believing are 2 different things." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I've been doing this 15 years. I've seen what happens when people look the other way." She wrote something in her file. I did not ask what. Week 2, Kendra came. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with 3 cardboard boxes stacked in her arms, cheerful and purposeful, the energy of a woman who has decided something without discussing it with anyone. She'd been a homestager before she and Scott married, a fact she mentioned often enough that I had come to understand it served as her authority on all matters involving other people's rooms. She set the boxes down in my living room. She looked at my walls. She tilted her head the way I had seen people do at open houses. She said, "I thought I'd freshen things up a bit, Myra. This wallpaper is so dated." Before I could respond, she was moving furniture. The arrangement I'd kept for 11 years shifted in 20 minutes. My end tables went to the corners. My reading lamp moved 3 feet. She lifted the frame containing my wedding photo, Frank and me, on the steps of the church. June 1981. The photo I had looked at every morning for 45 years, and she placed it face inward against the closet wall. In its place, she hung an abstract print in ochre and teal still in its tissue paper backing. I said, "Kendra, I didn't ask for." She said, "Oh, it's nothing. You've been so stressed. Let me handle the house stuff while you rest." That evening, she posted a photo on Instagram. My living room newly arranged. The caption read firsts. 47 people liked it. I sat in the altered room and looked at the wall where Frank's face used to be. Then Kendra, still cheerful, still moving, said, "Scott and I have been talking. We think it might be better if the kids come here after school. More space, better yard." She looked at me as though this were a gift. I called Bryce on a Wednesday evening. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and my notes, and I told him everything in order. Scott absent since day 2, 11 minutes on doorbell footage, prescriptions, not filled. Kendra rearranging the house. The wedding photo against the closet wall. Bryce was quiet for 5 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "Mom, are you sure you're not overthinking this? You just had major surgery. Painkillers can make people a little, I said, "I'm not on painkillers anymore, Bryce. I'm telling you what's happening in my own house." He said, "Scott told me he's been there every other day. He said, you're doing great." I said he lied. There was a pause. When Bryce spoke again, his voice had shifted into something careful and practiced the tone he used when he wanted to appear reasonable. "Mom, you've always been a little paranoid. Remember how you accused Dad of hiding money and it turned out to be a surprise anniversary fund?" I remembered. I also remembered that I had found a discrepancy in our joint account and reported what I found. The fact that it was a pleasant surprise did not mean my process was flawed. Bryce said, "Mom, you're being difficult." I set my jaw. I did not speak. He said, "Just let Scott help. He's doing his best. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I said, "Good night, Bryce." And I hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a while. The clock over the stove ticked. My coffee had gone cold. My youngest son had used his dead father to call me irrational, and he had done it without raising his voice in the smooth, blameless tone of someone who had already chosen a side. Monday morning, week 3, 7:15, the doorbell. I made it to the door in 4 minutes on the walker. Standing on my front porch, Logan 11, Haley 8, and Cody 5, all 3 with backpacks and lunchboxes, looking at me the way children look at something they've been sent to do and aren't entirely sure about. Past them, Scott's car idling at the curb window down, he called out, "Mom, Kendra has a staging appointment and my interview ran long. Just for today." He waved once. He drove away. Just for today became every weekday for the following 2 weeks, 7:15 to 4:30, 5 days a week. I chased Cody across the backyard on a walker. He was 5 and entirely without fear, and he ran because running was what he did, and I moved after him because there was no one else. My hips screamed. I sat down on the patio chair and stayed there for 20 minutes, gripping the armrest, telling myself to breathe, watching Cody investigate the garden border with a stick. I had spent my career managing budgets. The math on this was not complicated. Kendra had previously paid $2,400 a month for daycare. Now she paid nothing. I spent $180 a week on snacks, juice boxes, and chicken nuggets from my own savings. When I called Scott to raise it, he said, "We're family, Mom. This is what family does." I said, "Your family hasn't refilled my prescription in 2 weeks." He said, "I'll get to it. Relax." He sent his children to a woman who could not walk to the bathroom without a metal frame. And he called it family. He said it without hesitation, without irony, without a single pause. The following Friday, Ruth arrived at 10 o'clock in the morning and stopped in the doorway. The living room, Kendra's rearrangement abstract print on the wall. My wedding photo still propped face in against the closet. Cody asleep on the floor between the coffee table and the sofa, mouth open. Logan and Haley arguing in low voices in the kitchen over the last juice box. Me on the sofa in the same clothes I'd worn Thursday, exhausted in the way that goes past tired and into something that doesn't have a clean name. Ruth set her bag down. She looked at me. She said, "Mrs. Swanson, this can't continue. You are 3 weeks post-surgery and you're watching 3 children. This is not safe, not for you and not for them." I looked around the room. The coastal sage paint Kendra had brought in samples of last week still taped to the south wall. The walker in the corner. Frank's chair empty. 3 children I loved and had not asked for. I got up. I went to Frank's desk in the study, the one I had not moved or changed in 4 years, the one where I still kept things that mattered. I opened the bottom drawer and took out the folder. Navy blue label in Frank's handwriting. Swanson Family Trust. Irrevocable. I sat down with it. I opened it. I read the no contest clause. I had spent 31 years at Ridgemont Regional. I caught a $2.3 million billing fraud by following the pattern. You look for the first incident, you note the second. 3 incidents is a pattern, and a pattern is actionable. My son had given me 3. I picked up my phone and I called Pat Yun. I said, "Pat, it's Myra. I need a consultation not for estate planning, this time for protection." Pat Yun's office was on the 4th floor of the Hargrove building downtown. A room lined with file cabinets and the particular quiet of a place where people came when things had already gone wrong. Pat had been Frank's attorney first, then mine after he passed. She was 58, direct in the way that costs extra and is always worth it. She reviewed the trust documents. She set them flat on her desk and looked at me over her reading glasses. The no contest clause is airtight. If Scott or Bryce challenge your decisions regarding the house or the trust, they lose their share. Period. I said, and if he's trying to establish residency to claim the caretaker exemption. She looked at me for a moment. Then he's doing exactly what the clause was designed to prevent. But we need documentation, not a notebook. Proper evidence dated, sourced, consistent. I said I spent 3 decades building evidence folders. I know it holds up. We built the system that afternoon. Video doorbell motion detection logging on footage, archived weekly, sent to Pat's secure file server. All text messages screenshotted and emailed to Pat on a rolling basis. Bank alerts enabled for any transaction over $200 with a secondary notification to Pat's office. Ruth Apor formal care notes in the medical file dated consistent, professionally recorded. I also scheduled a Locksmith Week 6 circled on the calendar on my phone. I did not tell Scott. I did not tell Bryce. I did not tell anyone. People believe that revenge requires fury, a righteous anger, something hot and consuming. They are wrong. Revenge requires a filing system, a timeline, someone who knows exactly which clause applies and has the documents to prove it. On the way home from Pat's office in the March afternoon light, I felt for the first time in 3 weeks entirely like myself. I came home from physical therapy on a Thursday afternoon, and I smelled it before I opened the door. Paint the particular chemical sharpness of fresh latex, the kind that gets into the curtains and stays for days. I stood in the entryway for a moment, the south wall of my living room coastal sage, the color she had taped samples of 3 weeks ago, the dusty green that the internet called serene and that I had looked at and said nothing about because I was choosing my battles. The wall was freshly painted, still tacky at the edges. The paint cans, 4 of them, were stacked by the baseboard. My wedding photo was on the floor, leaning against the wall I had just had painted over it. Frank painted that wall cream in the summer of 1994. I remember the weekend. We borrowed a ladder from the Garkas next door, and Frank did the high parts while I did the trim, and we argued pleasantly about whether to do a second coat on a Saturday afternoon. And we did. We did the second coat. Kendra came in from the kitchen with a paintbrush still in her hand. She said, "Surprise. I thought a fresh color would brighten things up. The old color was depressing." I looked at her. I said, "Kendra, did you ask me before you painted my wall?" She said, "I didn't want to bother you. You've been so tired." I said, "This is my house. You don't paint my walls without asking." Her face changed. The pleasantness drained out of it and left something harder underneath. She said, "I was trying to help." God, you're just like Scott said. I kept my expression still, just like Scott said. I recorded that in my phone notes. Date time, her exact words. That evening, I pulled the doorbell footage. She had arrived at 8:42 that morning with 4 cans of paint in a tote bag. She painted over 30 years of my life in an afternoon. She called it a surprise. Sunday evening, the children gone. Kendra gone. The house quiet in the way houses are quiet when people have left and taken their noise but not their damage. Scott had not been to my house in 9 days. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table I had sat at for 32 years. The oak one Frank bought at an estate sale in 1990 and refinished himself over a long weekend, which I had complained about and was grateful for ever since. 2 chairs. Frank's chair had been empty for 4 years. Scott's chair empty since the morning he drove away from the curb with a wave. I heard it in my head the way you hear a song from somewhere and can't locate the source. That's a promise, Mom. I checked my phone. The last text from Scott read, "Hey, Mom, crazy week. Kids good, love you." No question mark after kids good, not a question, a statement. He was not asking. He was telling me the children had been fed and returned and the arrangement was continuing. And wasn't that something a memory Scott at 8, sitting on the stairs in his pajamas after a school play I had not attended? Frank sitting beside him, arm around him. Frank's voice carrying through the house to where I stood in the kitchen. "Your mom works hard so we can have this house, buddy." And Scott's voice, quiet and certain in the way children are certain. "I don't want the house, I want Mom." He got the house, or he believed he did, and he still did not want me. I poured the cold coffee down the drain. I made a fresh cup. I opened my laptop. I emailed Pat Yoon with 5 attachments, doorbell logs, text screenshots, a timeline of Kendra's modifications to my home Ruth's care notes, and a photograph I had taken of the coastal sage wall with Frank's wedding photo propped at its base. The subject line read, "Documentation Week 4, ready when you are." The phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. Donna Hale, Frank's younger sister, 72 years old, the family archivist of every slight anyone had ever committed against anyone. Her voice came through warm and honeyed the way it always did when she was about to say something she'd been rehearsing. "Myra, honey, how's the hip?" I said, healing Donna, "Thank you for asking." She said, "That's so good to hear." A pause. "Precisely long enough. Scott mentioned you've been a little forgetful lately. He's worried." "We all are." I set down my coffee. I kept my voice even. "Forgetful, Donna. I balanced a $200 million budget for 15 years. "Of course you did," she said. "He just mentioned you left the stove on." "I haven't used the stove in 3 weeks. I said Scott would know that if he'd been here." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had gone softer. "Well, you know, Scott, he just cares. And the house. That big house, just you alone. Frank would have wanted the boys to have it. You know that, Myra." There it was. I ended the call politely. I checked my doorbell log. Donna had visited 12 days ago, a Tuesday while I was at physical therapy. She was inside my house for 44 minutes and Kendra's car was already in the driveway when she arrived. I had not known she was coming. I had not given her a key. Someone had. She had told Scott the house appraised at $485,000. I knew this because Donna could not keep a secret she thought made her useful. She'd been saying for months that Frank's house should stay with Frank's boys. She was not caring for me. She was constructing a narrative. Confused widow declining memory in need of someone to manage her affairs. I labeled the doorbell clip Exhibit C. Bryce called the next morning. He did not ask how my hip was. He got to it fast. "Donna called me. She said you were combative." His voice was measured. "Reasonable in that particular way. Scott says you've been confused. We're thinking it might be good to have someone manage things for a while, just during recovery." Someone. I said just to handle the bills, the house stuff. "So you don't have to worry." I knew what manage things meant. I had been an operations VP. I spoke the language. Someone was Scott. Manage things was power of attorney. Just during recovery was a door you open once and rarely close. I said, "Bryce, I am not confused. I am neglected. There is a difference." He took a breath. "Mom, you're being difficult." There it was again. Word for word, the same phrase. I had a note in my phone from the first time he said it. Now I made a second note. He said, "Oh, we just want what's best for you." I said, "Good night, Bryce." And I hung up. I sat with the quiet. Then I noticed Haley's iPad on the side table. She had left it after the kids went home 2 days earlier. It was still logged into Kendra's iCloud. A notification banner, Swanson Fam Chat, Group message preview. I opened it. My hands were steady. Scott Mom's getting worse. She yelled at Kendra over paint. Kendra, she's hostile. Donna Frank always said she was stubborn. Bryce, should we talk to a lawyer about guardianship? 4 people planning my future. Heart emoji on the chat name. My family had a group chat about me planning how to take my house, my money, and my name off my own front door. And they named it Swanson Fam Chat with a heart emoji. I screenshotted the entire thread, emailed it to Pat. Subject line Exhibit F. 4 people a group chat, and not one of them thought to ask how I was getting to my physical therapy appointments. If you've ever been the person everyone talks about, but no one talks to, you know exactly what that feels like. Hit that like button for Myra, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This story is just getting started. Late evening. I sat in the living room with the lamp on. The south wall and coastal sage. The color had settled in. 3 weeks dry now. No longer sharp, just present. I reached over from the sofa and ran my hand along it. Smooth, flat, nothing like the textured cream that had been there since 1994. The one that had caught the afternoon light differently. The one that had been mine. Kendra had left a paint swatch on the kitchen counter, a strip of pale ivory manufacturer's name at the top. Master bedroom. Ethereal white. She had painted the living room. She was planning the bedroom. Next, the room where Frank had died on a February morning 4 years ago, where I had sat beside him and held his hand and talked about nothing important until his breathing slowed and then stopped. She'd already chosen a color for that room. I picked up the swatch. I looked at it. Then I called Pat. She answered on the second ring. I said, I've made my decision. I want to file the APS complaint. I want the locks changed, and I want you at my house on March 29th. She said, what happens on March 29th? Scott is organizing a family meeting. I said, he calls it an intervention. He thinks it's for me. It's not. Pat was quiet for 1 second. Then I'll be there. What do you need me to bring? Everything I said. I set the swatch on the counter. I did not throw it away. Kendra left a paint swatch for the room where my husband took his last breath. Ethereal white. I kept the swatch. It became Exhibit D. Tuesday morning. My phone at 653, bank alert, blue banner. A request has been made to add an authorized user to your checking account. Name Scott R. Swanson. I sat with it for a moment. I was still in my robe. Then I called the bank. The branch manager came on. A patient woman named Celia, who had once helped Frank sort out a wire transfer gone wrong and had remembered my name ever since. She confirmed it. Scott had come in person the previous afternoon and said he needed access to help his mother pay bills during her recovery. He had my social security number. He had a utility bill. Celia said he had everything, but you put a flag on this account 3 years ago. No changes without in-person verification from the account holder. That's why we called. I had put that flag on the account because Pat Yoon had advised it, just in case she had said. I had thought at the time that just in case seemed somewhat dramatic. It arrived on a Tuesday. He had my social security number. He had taken it from the filing cabinet in Frank's study, the same cabinet where I kept the trust documents. The same cabinet he had walked past every day of his childhood without ever once opening. He had finally opened it. He just hadn't thought to look all the way to the back. I thanked Celia. I hung up. I printed the alert from the bank's app. I labeled it Exhibit E. Unauthorized account access attempt. Scott hadn't just wanted the house, he had wanted the money too. Both of those things, it turned out, I had already arranged for him not to have. Thursday, physical therapy. Karen, my PT, had me walk the hallway. 10 steps without the walker, my hip held. I took all 10 steps, turned, looked at her. She handed me a cane, straight wooden shaft rubber tip, the kind that felt like a decision rather than a concession. I set the walker aside. That aluminum frame I had gripped for 6 weeks, the cold handles the 4-point shuffle, and I picked up the cane. I went from a frame to a stick. Progress. On the way home, I stopped at the mailbox for the first time since the fall. A small stack, 2 pieces of junk, a water bill, and an envelope from the State Adult Protective Services. I stood at the mailbox and read it twice. Right there on the sidewalk. Complaint substantiated. Case number assigned. A caseworker had been in contact with my provider of record. Review under active status. Ruth came that afternoon. She saw me at the kitchen table with the cane against the chair beside me. She stopped. She smiled. The real kind, not the careful professional smile she wore when things were bad. She said, "Look at you, Mrs. Swanson." I said, "Ruth, you're the only person who's asked me how I'm doing without an agenda." She said, "That's because I don't want your house." We laughed. The first real laugh in 6 weeks. It lasted only a moment, but it was genuine and clean, and I held on to it. I asked Ruth to put her observations in a formal written statement, dated specific signed. She said yes without hesitation. She said, "And Mrs. Swanson, you're not difficult. You're right." Tuesday morning, the knock I had known for 22 years. Lorraine Briggs stood at my door with banana bread and a dish towel, same as she had almost every Tuesday since 1998. I let her in. She set the bread on the counter, and then she sat down at my kitchen table with the particular posture of someone who has been composing something in her head for longer than she let on. She said, "Myra, I need to talk to you." I said, "All right, I've been texting my daughter." She said, "About what I've been seeing." She put her phone on the table and slid it toward me. 16 texts, most recent first, dates going back 4 weeks, Scott's children unsupervised in the backyard. Times and descriptions, Kendra's car in the driveway on mornings. Lorraine knew I was at PT. 2 men contractors, possibly carrying something through the side gate on a Wednesday afternoon while I was out. Lorraine had noted the license plates. She said, "I was a teacher for 33 years. When something's wrong with a child's home, you notice. I notice it here too." I read every text carefully. She had the dates right. She had the times right. She had noticed things the doorbell camera hadn't caught. I asked if she would be willing to share her texts with Pat Yun. She said, "I'll do more than that. I'll sit in a room and say it to anyone who needs to hear it." I said, "You might get that chance sooner than you think." She patted my hand once. Then she cut the banana bread, and we sat there in the quiet kitchen, and it tasted exactly like it had for 22 years. Scott called on a Friday. His voice had a warmth. I recognized the warmth he deployed when he wanted something and needed to make that fact invisible. "Mom, we should all get together, the whole family at your place. March 29th, like old times." I said, "What's the occasion?" "No occasion." He said, "Just family. Bryce is flying in. Aunt Donna, too. Kendra's making her potato salad." He said it the way people describe things they have already decided, not asking, narrating. And I knew because I had read the group text exactly what March 29th was. A unified front. Everyone in the room at once. Kendra with her confidence, Bryce with his reasonable voice, Donna with her version of Frank's wishes, and Scott with the papers. Power of attorney or a deed in both names or something else Pat and I hadn't anticipated yet. Dressed as a family dinner arrived at by committee. I said, "That sounds lovely, Scott." "March 29th, I'll make coffee." After we hung up, I sat for a moment. Then I called Pat. I said, "March 29th is confirmed. They're all coming." She said, "I'll have everything ready. A PS confirmation bank records doorbell footage, Ruth's statement, Lorraine's texts, and the trust clause. Do you want me there in person?" "I want you in the kitchen." I said, "When I call you in, that's when you enter." Pat laughed. A short, genuine sound. "You really were an operations VP." I said, "I still am." He invited the whole family. He thought it was his intervention. He didn't know I'd been preparing mine for 4 weeks. The formal letter from APS arrived on a Wednesday. I read it at the kitchen table 3 times. Complaint substantiated. Classification neglect with contributing environmental factors. The caseworker's notes documented what she had found during her visit. Post-surgical patient, 69 years old, responsible for managing 3 minor children without primary caretaker present. Home modifications made without consent, inadequate support structure during active recovery. The phrase the state used was environmental factors contributing to neglect. The translation was plain enough. The people around me had created the conditions. In 31 years of hospital administration, I filed hundreds of reports, incident logs, compliance reports, billing audits. This was the first one with my name on it as the complainant, and the respondent was my own son. I forwarded the letter to Pat. She added it to the file alongside the bank alert, the doorbell footage, the group text screenshots, and Ruth's statement. Then she filed supplemental documentation. Donna's visit during PT. Donna's role in spreading the competency narrative, the group text, discussing guardianship, the paint swatches, the misplaced furniture. Adult Protective Services does not open cases because someone's being difficult. They open cases because someone's being harmed. That sentence came from their own pamphlet. I had read it 3 times in the lobby of Pat's building on the day I filed. The case number was now official. The doorbell footage was now official evidence in a state file, not just something I had collected alone. I put the letter in the folder. I labeled the tab with a single word. I had been doing that for 6 weeks, 1 word per tab. The word on this tab was substantiated. Kendra came alone on a Monday. No boxes, no paint. She sat down at my kitchen table slowly, the way people sit when they haven't decided what they're going to say yet. Her eyes were tired. She looked her age for the first time since I had known her. She said, "Myra, can I be honest with you?" I said, "Please." I know I shouldn't have painted without asking. She looked at her hands on the table. When I see an empty wall, I need to fill it. My parents lost our house when I was 19. I came home from my first semester of college and there was a padlock on the door. She paused. My room, my things gone. I came home from college and I had nowhere to go. I listened. I did not move or speak. I just want a place that's mine, she said, that no one can take away. I felt it, not softness exactly, but recognition. I knew what it was to lose a place. I had spent Frank's last years afraid of what quiet meant. Then Kendra said, "That's why Scott and I think it would be best if the house was in both your names for protection for all of us." The sympathy had been the pitch. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Kendra, I'm sorry about your parents' house, but this house is not your therapy." Her face changed. The tiredness hardened into something else. She said, "Fine, we'll talk about it at the family meeting." For a moment, I saw the 19-year-old girl standing in front of a padlocked door. Then she asked me to put my house in her husband's name, and the moment passed. March 27th, 2 days before I sat at Frank's desk oak. He had built it himself in 1987 with a neighbor's table saw, and a weekend he said he'd never get back. It was solid and square, and nothing about it had moved in 39 years. I opened the manila folder labeled March 29th. I had assembled it over 6 weeks, 1 document at a time, the same way I had assembled audit packages at the hospital, not in anger, not in haste, but with the understanding that the record had to be able to stand on its own. Video doorbell log 47 entries. Scott's total time across 6 weeks, 4 hours and 22 minutes. Text archive, 31 messages. None about my health or recovery. All about the children or logistics. Bank alert printout. APS letter with case number. Ruth's sworn statement, 6 pages dated signed. Lorraine's text thread. 16 entries with dates and descriptions. The Swanson fam chat screenshots in order. And at the back, the trust document. No contest clause highlighted in yellow. He said, "That's a promise, Mom. I should have known." Promises don't need to be sworn. I called Pat. She said, "Are you ready?" I said, "I was ready the day I fell. I just needed to stand up first." The locksmith was confirmed for the following morning. New locks, new keys. 1 for me, 1 for Pat. I had already texted Scott that the front door code had been updated for security. People think revenge requires anger. At the hospital, we called it closing the audit. Same thing, less screaming. I closed the folder. I set it on the corner of Frank's desk. I left the lamp on. March 28th, 9 in the morning. The locksmith arrived in a white van and rang the bell promptly. Lorraine was on her porch across the street with a mug of coffee, watching with the patient interest of a woman who has earned the right to watch. The locksmith was a compact, efficient man who knelt in front of my door and had the new deadbolt seated in under 20 minutes. Brushed nickel. He held up the old hardware and said, "Someone forget their keys?" I said something like that. $340 cash. I kept the receipt. I had lost count of the exhibit numbers, so I wrote across the top in marker, "Locksmith, March 28th. I tested every door front back side, every key turned cleanly. I walked through the living room on my way back to the kitchen. Coastal sage walls. Kendra's paint swatch still on the counter where she had left it. I picked it up. I tore it in half. I dropped it in the trash without breaking stride. I texted Scott, "See you tomorrow. Front door code is changed. Just ring the bell." He replied within the minute. "Why did you change the code?" I said, "Security update. The locksmith recommended it." He wrote, "Okay, you could have told me." I did not respond. I was done explaining my own front door to my own son. That evening, Pat stopped by with the final document package. We sat at the kitchen table and went through it. She left at 8. I washed my mug red for 30 minutes and slept better than I had in 6 weeks. $340. That's what it cost to take my house back. Best money I've ever spent. 6 in the morning. Coffee black. The way I have made it since 1979. I stood at the kitchen window and drank it. The yard was still. The maple Frank had planted along the back fence had started leafing. The light was the particular gray of early March that turns gold by 9 if the clouds cooperate. I moved the living room chairs into a semicircle before 7. Not a confrontational arrangement, a meeting arrangement. 6 chairs, coastal sage walls on all sides. I thought about taking the coastal sage as a loss, then decided it was fine. It was just paint. The walls were still mine. Pat arrived at 9 with her folder. She went directly to the kitchen, pulled out a chair, set down a glass of water, and opened her documents. She did not make small talk. I had chosen her for exactly that quality. Ruth had offered to be there. I said, "No. You've done enough. I need your statement to stay clean from someone who wasn't in the room when it happened." She said she understood. Lorraine. I had called the night before. I told her, "If you hear yelling, don't worry. If you hear silence, that's when it worked." She laughed and said she'd have banana bread ready for afterward. At 10 o'clock, Kendra's car pulled to the curb first, then Donna's, then an Uber. Bryce from the airport rolling a small carry-on up my front walk. Last, Scott's car parking in the driveway with the ease of a man who believes the space belongs to him. Scott tried the door, stood there for a moment, then rang the bell. I opened it with my cane in one hand and my coffee in the other. Standing steady, answering my own door, I said, "Good morning. Come in." He rang the bell at his mother's house. That was the first thing that went wrong for him. They arranged themselves the way people do when they've rehearsed. Scott stood. Kendra sat to his left on the love seat. Bryce took the chair by the window eyes, already aimed at the floor. Donna held a folded tissue in both hands. My house, coastal sage walls, my cane, my coffee. Scott cleared his throat. "Mom, we're all here because we love you and we're worried." Kendra nodded. One slow nod like she'd practiced that, too. "Since the surgery, you've been different." Scott's voice had the careful warmth of someone who'd written notes forgetting things. "Getting upset over small things. Kendra tried to help with the house and you yelled at her." He paused. "You left the kids unsupervised." I looked at him. "I left the kids unsupervised. The point is," he pressed on, didn't answer. "We think it's time to talk about having someone help manage your day-to-day, your finances, the house. I've talked to a lawyer." And Donna leaned forward. "Frank would have wanted this, Myra." Bryce looked at the floor harder. "Mom, no one's trying to take anything. We just want to make sure you're safe." I let them finish. Every sentence, every pause for effect. I sipped my coffee while Donna dabbed her eye with the tissue she'd pre-staged. When the room went quiet, I said, "Are you done?" Scott started again. "We just want—" I asked if you were done. I set my coffee on the table, picked up my cane, stood, because now it's my turn. I turned toward the kitchen doorway. "Pat, would you join us, please?" Pat Yen walked in with a manila folder and the unhurried stride of someone who had nothing to prove. Scott's mouth opened. "Who is that, my elder law attorney?" I looked at my son. Sit down, Scott. I let them say every word. I wanted them on record, and I wanted Pat to hear it. Pat opened the folder. Didn't say a word yet. Just opened it. I didn't raise my voice. I don't raise my voice. I presented the way I used to present quarterly budget reviews to the hospital board. Steady, chronological, no editorial. Scott, you told this family you moved in to take care of me. Let me show you what that looked like. I nodded to Pat. She slid out the first page. Doorbell logs. 6 weeks. Total time you spent inside this house. 4 hours and 22 minutes. Time-stamped. Verified. I paused. 4 hours over 6 weeks. Kendra's chin moved. She didn't look at Scott. 31 texts. I kept everyone. Pat placed the printed stack on the coffee table. Not one asked about my physical therapy. Not one asked if I had groceries, but several asked when I was feeling up to discussing the house. Scott's face had gone very still. March 12th. I watched him. You tried to add your name to my checking account at my bank using my social security number. I have the alert. Mom, that was just, I was trying to help. You are 8 months unemployed, Scott. Flat even. You have no income. You have no savings. What exactly were you helping with? The room was silent, the way a room goes silent when something true lands in it. Kendra stared at her husband. She hadn't known. I could see it in the set of her jaw, not grief. Calculation. Scott told this family I'd been difficult. He said it to Kendra, to Bryce, to Donna, to anyone who would carry it forward. Difficult is what kept me alive. Difficult is what kept records. Difficult is what built this house in the first place. I read the numbers the way I read hospital budgets. No emotion. Just facts. Facts are louder than tears. But I'm not finished. I nodded again. Pat set a new stack on the table. Color printouts. Screenshots a group chat I said called Swanson Fam Chat with a heart emoji. I picked up the top sheet. March 17th. Scott. She's getting worse. We need to move on this before she does something stupid. March 19th. Kendra, we could frame it as concern. Elder care angle. March 21st. Donna. Frank always said this house should stay in the family. March 23rd. Bryce. Do we need to actually go for guardianship or just POA? I set the sheet down, looked around the room. You named it with a heart emoji? Bryce's voice was barely audible. Mom, that's out of context. Bryce. I turned to him. You flew here from Denver, a $900 flight. You visited me once in 4 years. We didn't even talk at Christmas. You sent a gift card. I didn't blink, but guardianship got you on a plane. He had no answer for that. He looked like a man being asked to explain a debt he'd hoped everyone forgot. Donna stood up, dabbed her eye. Myra, I never meant Donna. My voice didn't change register. You told my son my house was worth $485,000. You visited this property with Kendra on March 18th while I was at physical therapy. 44 minutes on my doorbell camera. What were you doing here for 44 minutes? The tissue crumpled in her hand. Kendra leaned towards Scott. Her voice was a hiss. You told me she didn't have cameras. I looked at her. I have cameras, Kendra. I've always had cameras. Pat stepped forward. She has a way of doing that. Not dramatic, just present, like a closing argument that arrived on schedule. My name is Patricia Young. I'm Mrs. Swanson's elder law attorney. In 2023, I established the Swanson Family Irrevocable Trust. Scott turned what trust, the trust that holds this property and Mrs. Swanson's primary financial assets. Pat's voice had the same temperature mine did. She didn't need volume either. The trust includes a no contest clause. Any named beneficiary who challenges the trust attempts to interfere with the trustee's decisions or exerts undue influence on the grantor forfeits their interest in full. No appeal, no reinstatement. Scott stood up. I didn't know that's relevant, Pat said. By attempting unauthorized addition to Mrs. Swanson's bank account using her social security number without her consent. And by organizing this meeting with the expressed intent of transferring her power of attorney against her stated wishes, you have triggered the clause. The word triggered sat in the room like a verdict. I looked at my son calm, steady. The way I looked at difficult budget numbers for 30 years. The house was never yours, Scott. It was in the trust the whole time. I held his gaze. And you just lost your share of it. His mouth opened closed. Years ago in the same living room. He sat on the floor in front of the TV and told me, I don't want the house, Mom. I want you. He was 8. He meant it then. I believe he meant it then. You said that's a promise, Mom. You kept one promise, Scott. You promised me the truth about who you are. Pat, you triggered the clause yourself, Mr. Swanson. No one did this to you. This is insane. Scott's voice hit the ceiling. The coastal sage walls held it. You can't. This is my family's house. Dad built this. Your father and I built this even precise together for 30 years. He turned to Bryce, his voice cracked. Are you hearing this? Are you just going to sit there? Bryce didn't move. He stared at the coffee table at the printed group text at the doorbell. Logs at the bank alert the $900 flight. All of it laid out in front of him. He didn't have a word. Kendra grabbed her purse from the floor. Her voice came out hard and flat. I told you this was a mistake. I told you she'd find out. Scott rounded on her. You're the one who said she didn't have cameras. Don't you dare put this on me. She stood. I am not the one who tried to get onto her bank account. Donna was already at the door. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back at me. She just opened it and walked out into the morning like a woman who'd suddenly remembered another appointment. The coalition fractured the way they always do. Remove the lie holding it together. And the people inside it turn on the nearest warm body. I sat down. I sipped my coffee. I watched. I didn't need to say another word. They did my job for me. Kendra left. Donna left. Bryce stayed in the chair another few minutes, head in his hands, not looking at anyone. Then he stood, said nothing to Scott, and walked out. Scott stood at the door, red-faced, breathing audibly. Mom. His voice had lost the rehearsed warmth. What was left was just raw stripped. You're really going to do this to your own son. I stood, walked to him, cane steady on my floor. I broke my hip on my own front porch. I kept my voice where it had been all morning. I lay on that ground for 40 minutes before anyone came. I spent 6 weeks alone. No groceries, no PT rides, no one at the door watching texts come in from a son who was 11 minutes away. I stopped in front of him. I watched you use my injury to try to take my home, my money, and my dignity. And you're asking me what I'm doing to you. He looked at me. He wanted something I didn't have for him. You keep saying family. I don't think that word means what you think it means. I stepped back. Even finished. Here's what's going to happen. Pat will send you the formal notice this week. A PS has an open case file and these locks stayed changed. I opened the front door, held it. You can visit on my terms with an appointment like everyone else. He walked out. He didn't look back. I closed the door. The new lock clicked. He walked out my front door for the last time as someone who thought he owned it. 2 weeks later, the APS caseworker called. The investigation was final. Elder neglect with contributing factors, documented, substantiated, filed. Scott would receive the formal notification by certified mail. There was nothing more for me to do on that end. It was done the way these things get done quietly, officially, without ceremony. Pat sent the trust notices the same week. Scott's share forfeited, redirected in full to the Frank Swanson Memorial Fund for Elder Care at Ridgemont Regional Hospital. His father's name on a fund that would pay for aids for people like me. I thought Frank would have liked that. I thought it on purpose. Bryce's share suspended pending review. He could petition to reinstate it by demonstrating a sustained, genuine relationship with me over the following 2 years. No lawyers, no group texts, just showing up. Kendra's renovation cost the coastal sage paint, the moved photographs, the replaced throw pillows. That was her loss, not reimbursable. The house would revert to my design and my timeline. Donna had no legal standing. She received no notice because there was nothing to send her. She was simply no longer on the list. April came in cool and ordinary. I bought a gallon of paint. The color was called Warm Linen. I'd found it in a swatch book at the hardware store, standing in the aisle without my walker for the first time. And I picked it because it looked the way morning light actually looks in my living room, not the way someone else imagined it might look. I painted the walls myself. 2 coats. Took me 3 days. My hip was fine. I donated the walker to Ridgemont Regional's physical therapy department. The aide at the desk said they always needed them. I kept the cane. Insurance, I told her. She smiled. Ruth came by for a last visit that Friday. She walked through the living room, took in the warm linen walls, and said, "Toughest patient I've had in 6 years." Then she looked at her clipboard. Also, the most well-documented. I told her she was welcome back. She said she'd already closed the case. Lorraine brought banana bread on Tuesday. She stood on the new non-slip mat outside the front door. $29.99, bought the week before. Should have bought it 6 weeks earlier and handed me the loaf like it was something ordinary. That was the point. My son called me difficult. My lawyer called me prepared. My neighbor called me every Tuesday. I know who my family is. In May, PT moved to the hospital where I'd spent 31 years as VP of operations. Different wings, same corridors. The physical therapist recognized me before I recognized her. "Mrs. Swanson," she said. "Welcome home." I painted the walls warm linen. Not because coastal sage was ugly, because it wasn't mine. Bryce called in May. Not a text. An actual phone call, which is its own kind of statement, from a man who'd been communicating in group chats. "Mom." He waited a beat. "I'm sorry. I should have come. Not for the meeting after you fell. I should have gotten on a plane then. I didn't say anything right away. Let it stand." "Yes," I said finally. "You should have." The line was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I visit for real? No agenda." "You can't," I said. "But I want you to understand something. Visiting is the beginning, not the apology. The apology is what comes after you show up and you keep showing up and you do it without a $900 flight and a manila folder full of guardianship research." He was quiet. "Okay. I'm not closing the door, Bryce. I'm just telling you which side of it you need to earn." He said he understood. I believe he believed that. Whether he acts on it is a different question. Scott has not called. "I do not expect him to." Bryce said sorry. Scott said nothing. One of those was harder to hear than the other. I spent 69 years building a life, a career, a home, a family. And when the people I built it for tried to take it apart, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I opened a folder. I called a lawyer. And I changed the locks because the strongest thing a woman can do at my age isn't forgive everyone. It's decide who deserves the key. If you've ever been the one holding the family together while everyone else just holds out their hand, Myra's story is for you. Tap that like button. It tells me you're here and you're listening. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, share it. Sometimes the person who needs it most won't ask for it. That's my story. 6 weeks, 1 broken hip, and a front door that finally locks from the right side. If this story reminded you that your boundaries are not negotiable, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.